For nearly 60 years after she sank, Britannic, the third Olympic-class liner, was largely forgotten, amounting to little more than a footnote in most books or programs about Titanic's history, if she was mentioned at all. In recent years, however, the surge of interest in Titanic research has led to extensive studies into the design, construction, careers, and fates of her two sister ships, Olympic and Britannic. Intended to be the ultimate Olympic-class liner, Britannic's story was particularly tragic because she was never fully completed and placed into passenger service. Instead, she was pressed into service as a hospital ship during World War I and sunk by a mine in the Aegean Sea on November 21, 1916. However, clues to Britannic's intended magnificence live on. In this episode, we are going to look at a surviving relic from the third Olympic-class liner, a piece that truly would have made her stand out from her older sisters, Olympic and Titanic. Join us on a voyage of discovery as we explore the story behind this incredible artifact and show you how this very piece still survives and can be visited today. Welcome to the Steam and Splendor Network. When Titanic began her maiden voyage in April 1912, she was touted as the world's largest ship, the most luxurious, the finest on the North Atlantic. This was largely advertising copyediting, for her older sister Olympic was exactly the same size as Titanic in terms of length, width, and weight. Only in terms of gross tonnage, a measurement of enclosed space rather than weight, did Titanic exceed Olympic and thus gain the bragging rights. And this was actually only an on-paper measurement. But that slight measurement difference allowed Titanic to claim the title of world's largest ship, and also in a sense, world's most luxurious ship, since her accommodations saw some very minor improvements over her older sister. But this passing of the torch from Olympic to Titanic was a vital one, because the White Star Line was locked in an international competition for bragging rights as to what company could offer prospective travelers the largest, most luxurious, or fastest ships in the world. Between 1907 and 1911, the Cunard Company had housed the two largest, most luxurious, and fastest liners in the world, Lusitania and Mauretania. The popularity of these ships ensured that they would not only steal headlines right and left, but that their passenger list had very good showings. Although Olympic and Titanic certainly one-upped the Cunard sisters in terms of size and comfort of accommodations, the two Cunarders still retained an edge on the speed front. Yet, they had not been sitting idle either. Cunard had taken many pointers from Olympic when she entered service in June 1911, and was even as Titanic prepared to begin her maiden voyage, incorporating many improvements based on Olympic into their next giant Atlantic liner, Aquitania, which was then under construction at the John Brown shipyard on the Clyde River. When she entered service in 1914, Aquitania would make for a trio of liners for the Cunard Company, offering not only the fastest, but arguably some of the most luxurious accommodations on the North Atlantic. Meanwhile, the German Hamburg America Line had also undertaken construction of their own trio of Leviathan ocean liners. They were to be named Imperator, Vaterland, and Bismarck. The first of these ships would be ready to launch a little over a month after Titanic began her maiden voyage. It was slated for a maiden voyage in early 1913. The two successive ships would follow a year and more later. Gaining this perspective shows how high stakes, how ferocious the transatlantic competition that Titanic was entering in April 1912 really was. Although Titanic was upping the ante, her competition was already engaging in taking the next step, bigger, better, or more luxurious. When Titanic sailed on April 10, 1912, White Star could claim to have two well-matched sisters in their fleet. However, more was needed to ensure that White Star Line's reliable weekly service would be held by 3 very similar sister or companion ships, a third Olympic-class liner. Back in June 1911, as Olympic was nearing the end of her maiden voyage, White Star had followed through with the order for a third ship of her class. She would become known as Britannic. White Star's management knew that by the time she actually began her maiden voyage, she would be facing much stiffer competition from Aquitania and the German behemoths. She would never hold the title of world's largest, world's longest, or world's fastest ocean liner. So the question was, how could White Star Line capitalize on the foundation that they had laid with Olympic and Titanic? With Britannic, they decided to up their game through increased luxury of accommodations and improved offerings in Britannic's fittings and appointments. This was to be accomplished in a number of ways. More private bathrooms for first-class passengers, an offering that was growing even more important. For example, Britannic's luxury of fittings would also be improved over her earlier sisters. This included upgrades to the private suites on B deck over what Titanic had offered, slightly more modern decor to keep up with the changing tastes of society, and much more.
Britannic's first-class entrance area was certainly going to see some improvements. One of these focused on an important part of life at sea in 1912, music. Olympic and Titanic had offered their passengers a number of pianos in various areas of all 3 classes. In first and second classes, trained professional musicians hired through the music agency Black Brothers of Liverpool, England, would perform these instruments at scheduled times throughout the day. But aboard Britannic, there would be another instrument that her older sisters had not enjoyed: the inclusion of a pipe organ in the forward first-class entrance on the boat and A-deck levels. Now, if including a pipe organ aboard a brand new ocean liner circa 1914 seems strange today, it's important to remember that organs were even then enjoying a surge of popularity with the public. For example, organs were being installed in theaters to provide accompaniment for silent films. Vast shopping centers like Harrods of London or Wanamaker's department store in Philadelphia, which opened in 1911, featured organs. In fact, the Wanamaker organ recently made headlines when the Macy's occupying the old Wanamaker store, yet another Titanic connection, closed permanently. The point is, however, that organs were very popular in 1914. It's been known for years that an organ was intended for installation aboard Britannic in the first-class entrance. The ship's general arrangement plans show the space for the organ against the aft wall of the entrance, and her specification book had called for an Aeolian organ with 2 chests for music rolls in that space. Interestingly, a decision was apparently made to change the Aeolian organ out with one from a competing company, M. Welte-Mignon in Freiburg and Breisgau. Welte is a well-known name in the annals of piano and organ history. Their German factory was located in Freiburg and Breisgau. They had first made a player piano in 1904 and had introduced the Welte-Mignon player piano in 1905, which had quickly become a sensation throughout the world. They had adapted the player piano technology that they had developed back into their Welte Philharmonie organs, the first of which was premiered to the public in 1911. Their Model 5-6 organ would have fit perfectly in the space outlined on Britannic's deck plans. It would have been playable either with paper rolls, or, since it was referred to as a Philharmonie instead of an orchestrion, also by means of a cleverly concealed keyboard. Welte was certainly proud of having one of their organs slated for installation so prominently aboard Britannic. They even commissioned illustrations showing the organ in place in an illustration of Britannic's entrance. This illustration was included in their 1913-14 catalog. It seems that Britannic's organ was actually built at the factory in Germany and finished, but exactly what happened next is unclear. Britannic was only launched on February 26, 1914, And even by that July into early August, her interiors were not even close to being complete enough to accept the installation of the Welte instrument. After the war erupted onto the world scene, if the organ was not already in Belfast, it was unlikely to have made it there from Germany, particularly with the Royal Navy having blockaded the shipments of many goods to and from Germany and its allies. After Britannic sank, her unused fittings and furnishings were sold off at auction, but there was no mention of the organ there. Around 1920, the Welte Company sold a Model 5/6 organ to Dr. August Nagel, who installed it in his private residence in Stuttgart. This instrument passed through several hands, miraculously surviving a Second World War and all of the political turmoil of the remainder of the 20th century. When workers began restoring this organ around 2006 to 2007, they began to notice that some of its original components bore inscriptions of the word Britannic, and it wasn't long before the instrument was identified as the one that had been intended for installation aboard the third Olympic-class liner, the oft-forgotten Britannic. The question remains, what had happened to the organ between the time it was originally built and the time that it was sold in 1920 to Dr. Nagel? The simple answer is, we don't know for sure. If it had been up in Belfast throughout the war, it must have been returned to Welte afterwards in time for its sale from the company to Dr. Nagel. However, an even simpler answer would seem to be even more likely: that the organ had probably never made it up to Belfast to begin with, caught behind enemy lines, as the saying goes, and unable to be delivered. Incredibly, the Museum of Music Automatons in Zeven still has this original instrument on display, and anyone can go there to hear the sound that would have been a very prominent feature of Titanic's younger sister ship. Interestingly, the organ's location at the top level of the entrance, which featured hard surface flooring and walls, and spanned all the way from the boat deck through E-deck, would have made for a slightly more interesting acoustic experience as the organ played, with more of an echo, more reflections, than in the current setup. However, this is without a doubt the intended sound of Titanic's sister ship. By way of comparison, we've also heard the sound of Titanic through a Steinway piano built for Olympic to replace an instrument that apparently sank with Titanic, and which had originally been installed aboard Olympic. Although the 1912 piano had never been aboard Titanic, it was made in the same German Steinway factory by the same workers and made of largely the same stock as the lost piano. The r.m.s. Olympic Steinway Association, whose president, Patrick Vita, visited the Britannic organ in Zeven and was able to obtain this footage for us, has been working to purchase and preserve the 1912 Olympic piano and is in a battle against time and funding to complete the purchase before 2025 has ended. During the research phase of this episode, our crew came upon a surprise discovery, which we'll get to in just a moment. But first, a little bit of background. A photograph of the 1911 Olympic a la carte restaurant piano still exists. We know that this Model K upright had a serial number of 143017, and that it was removed from the restaurant very shortly after Olympic entered service in June 1911. The piano that replaced it bore a serial number of 157550 and was a 1912 piano, doubtless installed during Olympic's extensive 1912-13 post-Titanic refit in Belfast. Each of these pianos, like most of the other pianos supplied to Olympic and Titanic, were art case instruments. They were ordered with a raw case. The unfinished pianos were then sent to Aldham, Heaton and Company, who were doing much of the interior decor work on White Star liners. There, the finished cases could be custom made to match the decor of the room that each piano would be fitted in. The 1912 Olympic Steinway is the very instrument that the r.m.s. Olympic Steinway Association has been trying to purchase, preserve, and display for the public. It was with Olympic for the remainder of her career, located in her restaurant reception room. It bore a few stylistic differences in the art case from the original 1911 instrument, but overall it was nearly identical to the lost piano. The original Olympic piano was apparently transferred to Titanic and placed in her first-class restaurant reception room on B deck. But what about the third ship of the class, Britannic? Harlan and Wolff had commissioned a number of high-quality illustrations that showed Britannic's sumptuous interiors and the glory that they never actually enjoyed. Britannic was due to have an enlarged restaurant reception room, slightly different than the layout found on either Olympic or Titanic. But as we were inspecting the reception room illustration during the research phase for this episode, we noticed a detail that we had never caught before. In the illustration, a 5-man ensemble is performing music for passengers, all clustered around an upright piano placed against the aft wall of the restaurant reception room. The gilt scrollwork at the top of this piano in the illustration is unmistakable. What does this mean? Apparently, a third Model K restaurant reception room piano was going to be, or was actually, commissioned for Britannic. Since Steinway's German factory was, like Welte's, located behind enemy lines once the war started, we have to ask, did this piano arrive in time before the war erupted to actually have its art case installed at Aldham Heaton and Company, as had been the case with its predecessors? If so, where did the piano go from there? Is Britannic's matching piano still out there waiting to be identified? Or was it just another in-the-raw case instrument that was never finished at the Steinway factory and was later sold by the company to someone else? Certainly these are good questions, and hopefully in the near future someone will be able to shed further light on this. One way or another, the 1912 Olympic piano still exists, and this is the instrument that we still hope to save. If you would like to help the r.m.s. Olympic Steinway Association in their endeavors to purchase the 1912 Steinway upright piano from Olympic's restaurant reception room, be sure to check out their website at www.rmsolympicpiano.com and go to the Contribute page to learn how. Discoveries such as the possibility of a third Model K piano highlight the gaps in the historical record regarding the intended, and ultimately realized, design and construction of Britannic's interiors. Because of the chaos of the First World War, the ship was never fully fitted out as a passenger liner before her loss, leaving many details of her decor and interior features still waiting to be rediscovered. Britannic's Welte organ, meanwhile, the instrument with such a unique history behind it, is safely on display in the Museum of Music Automatons in Savin, where it can be seen and heard by the public. If you're ever in the area, make sure to add this museum to your list of places to visit, and you can hear for yourself the voice of Britannic, Titanic's little-known younger sister. A special thank you to our supporters on Patreon, including Dean McIntosh, Evan Plumbing, Lucas Sidlowski, Charlotte Zurich, Bluebird Nut, Martin Cahill, Sam Forker, Maximilian Metcalf, Milos15 Gameplays, Nikki Chan 92, Rachel Warner Sanchez, Leslie Sheldon, Jason Stray, Roadway Wiz, and Snow Monkey.